The basis of the skull belongs to the chondrocranium, the part of skull that originates via chondrogenous ossification. It starts with several pieces of cartilage that finally will encapsulate some sensory organs. If this would be the top view of an embryonic head, and here there would be the cranial end of the notochord, then we have a pair of olfactory placodes, the word on the front. The word placode in this context means thickening and then invagination of ectodermal epithelium. We have laterally, we have lens placodes for the lens of the eye, and posteriorly in the region of the rhombencephalon we got otic placode that will become the inner ear. So we're here in front of the end of the notochord. There will be the hypophysis as an important landmark. The two pieces of cartilage in the rostral part anteriorly are called trabecular cartilage, and they keep on growing. Next part is hypophyseal cartilage, and they keep on growing as well. And another pair parallel to the notochord is called paracordal cartilage. And the arrows show or demonstrate that they keep on growing. So if we got the sensory placodes that are made of thickening of the head ectoderm, these are the following: the nasal placode, left and right, the placode of the lens placode, and the otic or auditory placode. And this is the notochord, its cranial end, and the paired pieces of hyaline cartilage, namely the trabecular cartilage the hypophyseal cartilage, and the paracordal cartilage. The growth and fusion of these pieces of cartilage forms the cartilagineous basis of the skull. Sorry, skull. Once more. This is the position of the hypophysis. An important landmark in the development of the cranium of the skull. So later on, the fusion of these pieces of cartilage will surround these sensory placodes, forming kind of cartilaginous capsules around these organs, around these sensory organs. To correlate this to the skull anatomy, this will become the nasal capsule. For example, the ethmoidal bone. This will become the body of the sphenoid bone, here with the hypophysis. This will become the petrous bone, the outer capsule. The petrous bone becomes later on incorporated into the temporal bone. And here there will be the occipital cartilage forming the body of the occipital bone. So these bones contribute to the formation of the final cartilagineous basis of the skull. Like the occipital cartilage. In a sagittal view, we would see the cranial part of the embryo with the stomodium and the brain vesicles, the prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon. If this is the head ectoderm, and so was this, by the way. This is the prosencephalon, the three brain vesicles, right? Prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon. So let's relate the brain vesicles to the position of these plicodes. Here is the olfactory plicode. It's induced by the prosencephalon. So there are some molecular signals going on here. Here will be laterally the projection of the plicode of the optic lens on the level of the future diencephalon, but laterally. And here on the level of the rhombencephalon, we got the optic plicode. Let's consider the development of the nasal cavity. And we focus on this region where the wall of the prosencephalon is inducing formation of the lens plicode from the surface head ectoderm. So the ectoderm is becoming thicker, and it will invaginate towards the prosencephalon. So the brain is inducing the thickening of olfactory plicode. nasal plicoid, well, synonym for this would be the olfactory, okay? I was using both terms of the olfactory plicoid. This is the head ectoderm. The olfactory plicoid is invaginating, thus giving rise to a small cavity called nasal pit. Then there is a medial nasal prominence, then a thin septum between the future nasal cavity and the oral cavity, and the oral vestibule, the tongue, with a thyroglossal duct, and the pharynx. And here we got the telencephalon that differentiates from the prosencephalon. It will be the first brain vesicle from the 5 brain vesicles. So this will be the telencephalon. This will be the week 6. What happened here is the invagination to form the nasal pit, which has this ectodermal epithelium on the surface still. This is the stomodium, the embryonic mouth cavity, the tongue, the pharynx. This is the medial nasal prominence. And this is a temporary oronasal membrane. Which later on perforates. As a result, in next stage, we got the growing nasal cavity, nasal chamber, here the primary palate will differentiate, and then there is a lower lip and the tongue, and the mouth cavity, and the pharynx. The epithelium here on the roof contains precursors of the sensory neurons that are sending their axons into the olfactory bulb, which differentiates from the telencephalon. So this is the olfactory bulb, the terminal part of the first cranial nerve, of the olfactory nerve. Here are the axons of neurons that are growing there, and they will join or interpolate with the neurons of the olfactory bulb. This is the nasal chamber, or nasal cavity, chamber, sorry. This is the primary palate. Also called the premaxilla. This is the lower lip. the tongue, the pharynx, the mouth cavity. And what we see here, that by disappearing of the oronasal membrane, we got a really broad communication between the embryonic nasal and oral cavities, which is called a primitive choane. But it will not stay like this. The secondary palate will be formed. So this is the roof of the nasal cavity with the olfactory region with the sensory neuroepithelium, the nasopharynx and the pharynx. The primary palate stays here, but the secondary palate develops and separates most of the nasal from the oral cavity. And here we got the lower lip, the tongue, and the pharynx. So the oral cavity, the turbinates that develop here, the 3 turbinates in the nasal cavity. We got the olfactory region here, sending the axons of sensory neuroepithelium into the olfactory bulb. That transmits the signals into the telencephalon, into the olfactory cortex. So this is the olfactory region. Let me split those schemes. And this is the primary palate. That becomes the incisive bone. Just another word for the premaxilla. And what is new here is this bony septum between the nasal and oral cavity, which is a secondary palate. Formed by the palatal shelves of the maxilla. Of the right and left maxilla. Now the communication between the nasal and oral cavity is narrow. We call it definitive. Choane, which is much more narrow, and actually is the nasopharynx here. Because here is already the pharynx. So I label also the sensory neuroepithelium here that is sending its axons into the olfactory bulb.